The Tale of Benjamin Bunny by Beatrix Potter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Evangeline Wells. One morning a little rabbit sat on a bank. He pricked his ears and listened to the trit-trot of a pony. A gig was coming along the road. It was driven by Mr. McGregor, and beside him sat Mrs. McGregor in her best bonnet. As soon as they had passed, little Benjamin Bunny slid down into the road and set off, with a hop, skip and a jump, to call upon his relations, who lived in the wood at the back of Mr. McGregor's garden. That wood was full of rabbit holes, and in the neatest, sandiest hole of all lived Benjamin's aunt and his cousins, Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. Old Mrs. Rabbit was a widow. She earned her living by knitting rabbit wool mittens and muffetees. I once bought a pair at a bazaar. She also sold herbs and rosemary tea, and rabbit tobacco, which is what we call lavender. Little Benjamin did not very much want to see his aunt. He came round the back of the fir tree, and nearly tumbled upon the top of his cousin Peter. Peter was sitting by himself. He looked poorly and was dressed in a red cotton pocket handkerchief. "Peter," said little Benjamin in a whisper, "who's got your clothes?" Peter replied, "The scarecrow in Mr. McGregor's garden," and described how he had been chased about the garden and had dropped his shoes and coat. Little Benjamin sat down beside his cousin and assured him that Mr. McGregor had gone out in a gig, and Mrs. McGregor also, and certainly for the day, because she was wearing her best bonnet. Peter said he hoped it would rain. At this point, old Mrs. Rabbit's voice was heard inside the rabbit hole, calling, "Cottontail, Cottontail, fetch some more chamomile." Peter said he thought he might feel better if he went for a walk. They went away hand in hand, and got upon the flat top of the wall at the bottom of the wood. From here they looked down into Mr. McGregor's garden. Peter's coat and shoes were plainly to be seen upon the scarecrow, topped with an old tam-o'-shanter of Mr. McGregor's. Little Benjamin said, "It spoils people's clothes to squeeze under a gate. The proper way to get in is to climb down a pear tree." Peter fell down head first, but it was of no consequence, as the bed below was newly raked and quite soft. It had been sown with lettuces. They left a great many odd little footmarks all over the bed, especially little Benjamin, who was wearing clogs. Little Benjamin said that the first thing to be done was to get back Peter's clothes, in order that they might be able to use the pocket handkerchief. They took them off the scarecrow. There had been rain during the night, there was water in the shoes, and the coat was somewhat shrunk. Benjamin tried on the tam-o'-shanter, but it was too big for him. Then he suggested that they should fill the pocket handkerchief with onions as a little present for his aunt. Peter did not seem to be enjoying himself. He kept hearing noises. Benjamin, on the contrary, was perfectly at home and ate a lettuce leaf. He said that he was in the habit of coming to the garden with his father to get lettuces for their Sunday dinner. The name of little Benjamin's papa was old Mr. Benjamin Bunny. The lettuces certainly were very fine. Peter did not eat anything. He said he should like to go home. Presently he dropped half the onions. Little Benjamin said that it was not possible to get back up the pear tree with a load of vegetables. He led the way boldly towards the other end of the garden. They went along a little walk on planks, under a sunny red brick wall. The mice sat on their doorsteps, cracking cherry stones. They winked at Peter Rabbit and little Benjamin Bunny. Presently, Peter let the pocket handkerchief go again. They got amongst the flower pots and frames and tubs. Peter heard noises worse than ever. His eyes were as big as lollipops. He was a step or two in front of his cousin when he suddenly stopped. This is what those little rabbits saw round that corner. Little Benjamin took one look, and then in half a minute, less than no time, he hid himself and Peter and the onions underneath a large basket. The cat got up and stretched herself, and came and sniffed at the basket. Perhaps she likes the smell of onions. Anyway, she sat down upon the top of the basket. She sat there for 5 hours. I cannot draw you a picture of Peter and Benjamin underneath the basket, because it was quite dark, and because the smell of onions was fearful. It made Peter Rabbit and little Benjamin cry. The sun got round behind the wood, and it was quite late in the afternoon, but still the cat sat upon the basket. At length there was a pitter-patter, and some bits of mortar fell from the wall above. The cat looked up and saw old Mr. Benjamin Bunny prancing along the top of the wall of the upper terrace. He was smoking a pipe of rabbit tobacco, and had a little switch in his hand. He was looking for his son. Old Mr. Bunny had no opinion whatever of cats. He took a tremendous jump off the top of the wall onto the top of the cat, and cuffed it off the basket, and kicked it into the greenhouse, scratching off a handful of fur. The cat was too much surprised to scratch back. When old Mr. Bunny had driven the cat into the greenhouse, he locked the door. Then he came back to the basket, and took out his son Benjamin by the ears and whipped him with the little switch. Then he took out his nephew Peter. Then he took out the handkerchief of onions and marched out of the garden. When Mr. McGregor returned, about half an hour later, he observed several things which perplexed him. It looked as though some person had been walking all over the garden in a pair of clogs, only the footmarks were too ridiculously little. Also, he could not understand how the cat could have managed to shut herself up inside the greenhouse, locking the door upon the outside. When Peter got home, his mother forgave him, because she was so glad to see that he had found his shoes and coat. Cottontail and Peter folded up the pocket handkerchief, and old Mrs. Rabbit strung up the onions and hung them from the kitchen ceiling, with the bunches of herbs and the rabbit tobacco. End of The Tale of Benjamin Bunny by Beatrix Potter.
The Elephant's Child by Rudyard Kipling. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. In the high and far-off times, the elephant, oh best beloved, had no trunk. He had only a blackish, bulgy nose, as big as a boot, that he could wriggle about from side to side, but he couldn't pick up things with it. But there was one elephant, a new elephant, an elephant's child, who was full of satiable curiosity, and that means he asked ever so many questions. And he lived in Africa, and he filled all Africa with his satiable curiosities. He asked his tall aunt, the ostrich, why her tail feathers grew just so, and his tall aunt, the ostrich, spanked him with a hard, hard claw. He asked his tall uncle, the giraffe, what made his skin spotty, and his tall uncle, the giraffe, spanked him with his hard, hard hoof. And still he was full of satiable curiosity. He asked his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, why her eyes were red, and his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, spanked him with her broad, broad hoof. And he asked his hairy uncle, the baboon, why melons tasted just so, and his hairy uncle, the baboon, spanked him with his hairy, hairy paw. And still he was full of satiable curiosity. He asked questions about everything that he saw, or heard, or felt, or smelt, or touched, and all his uncles and his aunts spanked him. And still he was full of satiable curiosity. One fine morning, in the middle of the procession of the equinoxes, this satiable elephant's child asked a new fine question that it had never asked before. He asked, "What does the crocodile have for dinner?" Then everyone said, "Hush," in a loud and dreadful tone, and they spanked him immediately and directly without stopping for a long time. By and by, when that was finished, he came upon the cooler bird, sitting in the middle of a wait-a-bit thorn bush, and he said, "My father has spanked me, and my mother has spanked me. All my aunts and uncles have spanked me for my satiable curiosity, and still I want to know what the crocodile has for dinner." Then the cooler bird said, with a mournful cry, "Go to the banks of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, and find out." That very next morning, when there was nothing left of the equinoxes, because the procession had proceeded according to the precedent, this satiable elephant's child took 100 pounds of bananas, the little short red kind, and 100 pounds of sugar cane, the long purple kind, and 17 melons, the greeny crackly kind, and said to all his dear families, "Goodbye, I'm going to the great grey-green greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, to find out what the crocodile has for dinner." And they all spanked him once more for luck, though he asked them most politely to stop. Then he went away, a little warm, but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rind about because he could not pick it up. He went from Grahamstown to Kimberley, and from Kimberley to Karma's country, and from Karma's country he went east by north, eating melons all the time, till at last he came to the banks of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, precisely as Coca-Cola Bird had said. Now, you must know and understand, O best beloved, that till that very week and day and hour and minute, this satiable elephant's child had never seen a crocodile, and did not know what one was like. It was all his satiable curiosity. The first thing that he found was a bi-coloured python rock snake curled round a rock. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child most politely, "have you seen such a thing as a crocodile in these promiscuous parts?" "Has I seen a crocodile?" said the bi-coloured python rock snake in a voice of dreadful scorn. "What will you ask me next?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but could you kindly tell me what he has for dinner?" Then the bi-coloured python rock snake uncoiled himself very quickly from the rock, and spanked the elephant's child with his scalesome, flailsome tail. "That's odd," said the elephant's child, "because my mother and father, and my uncle and my aunt, not to mention my other aunt, the hippopotamus, and my other uncle, the baboon, have all spanked me for my satiable curiosity, and I suppose this is the same thing." So he said goodbye very politely to the bi-coloured python rock snake, and helped to coil him up on the rock again, and went on, a little warm but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rind about because he could not pick it up, till he trod on what he thought was a log of wood at the very edge of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees. But it was really the crocodile, O best beloved, and the crocodile winked one eye, like this. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child most politely, "but do you happen to have seen a crocodile in these promiscuous parts?" Then the crocodile winked the other eye, and lifted half his tail out of the mud, and the elephant's child stepped back most politely, because he did not wish to be spanked again. "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile. "Why do you ask such things?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child most politely, "but my father has spanked me, my mother has spanked me, not to mention my tall aunt, the ostrich, and my tall uncle, the giraffe, who can kick ever so hard, as well as my broad aunt, the hippopotamus, and my hairy uncle, the baboon, and including the bi-coloured python rock snake with the scalesome, flailsome tail just up the bank, who spanks harder than any of them. And so, if it's quite all the same to you, I don't want to be spanked any more." "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile, "for I am the crocodile." And he wept crocodile tears to show it was quite true. Then the elephant's child grew all breathless and panted, and kneeled down on the bank and said, "You are the very person I've been looking for all these long days. Will you please tell me what you had for dinner?" "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile, "and I'll whisper." Then the elephant's child put his head down close to the crocodile's musky, tusky mouth, and the crocodile caught him by his little nose, which up to that very week, day, hour, and minute had been no bigger than a boot, though much more useful. "I think," said the crocodile, and he said it between his teeth like this, "I think today I will begin with elephant's child." At this, O best beloved, the elephant's child was much annoyed, and he said, speaking through his nose like this, "Let go, you're hurting me." Then the bi-coloured python rock snake scuffled down from the bank and said, "My young friend, if you do not know, immediately and instantly, pull as hard as ever you can. It is my opinion that your acquaintance in the large pattern leather ulster," and by this he meant the crocodile, "will jerk you into yonder limpid stream before you can say Jack Robinson." This is the way that bi-coloured python rock snakes always talk. Then the elephant's child sat back on his little haunches and pulled and pulled and pulled, and his nose began to stretch, and the crocodile floundered into the water, making it all creamy with great sweeps of his tail, and he pulled and pulled and pulled, and the elephant's child's nose kept on stretching, and the elephant's child spread all his 4 little legs and pulled and pulled and pulled, and his nose kept on stretching, and the crocodile threshed his tail like an oar, and he pulled and pulled and pulled, and at each pull the elephant's child's nose grew longer and longer, and it hurt him hideous. Then the elephant's child felt his leg slipping, and he said through his nose, which was now nearly 5 feet long, "This is too much for me." Then the bi-coloured python rock snake came down from the bank and knotted himself in a double clove hitch round the elephant child's hind leg, and said, "Rash and inexperienced traveller, we will now seriously devote ourselves to a little high tension, because if we do not, it is my impression that yonder self-propelling man-of-war with the armour-plated upper deck," and by this, best beloved, he meant the crocodile, "will permanently vitiate your future career." That is the way all bi-coloured python rock snakes always talk. So he pulled, and the elephant's child pulled, and the crocodile pulled, but the elephant's child and the bi-coloured python rock snake pulled hardest, and at last the crocodile let go of the elephant's child's nose with a plop that you could hear all up and down the Limpopo. Then the elephant's child sat down most hard and sudden, but first he was careful to say "thank you" to the bi-coloured python rock snake, and next he was kind to his poor pulled nose, and wrapped it all up in cool banana leaves, and hung it in the great grey-green greasy Limpopo to cool. "What you doing that for?" said the bi-coloured python rock snake. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but my nose is badly out of shape, and I'm waiting for it to shrink." "Then you'll have to wait a long time," said the bi-coloured python rock snake. "Some people do not know what is good for them." The elephant's child sat there for 3 days, waiting for his nose to shrink, but it never grew any shorter, and besides, it made him squint. For, oh, best beloved, you will see and understand that the crocodile had pulled it out into a really, truly trunk, same as all the elephants have today. At the end of the third day, a fly came and stung him on the shoulder, and before he knew what he was doing, he lifted up his trunk and hit that fly dead with the end of it. "Vantage number 1, said the bi-coloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere schmear nose. Try and eat a little now." Before he thought what he was doing, the elephant's child put out his trunk and plucked a large bundle of grass, dusted it clean against his forelegs, and stuffed it into his own mouth. "Vantage number 2, said the bi-coloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere schmear nose. Don't you think the sun is very hot here?" "It is," said the elephant's child, and before he thought what he was doing, he slooped up a sloop of mud from the banks of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo and slapped it on his head, where it made a cool, sloopy, sloshy mudcap, all trickly behind his ears. "Vantage number 3, said the bi-coloured python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere schmear nose. Now, how do you feel about being spanked again?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but I should not like it at all." "How would you like to spank somebody?" said the bi-coloured python rock snake. "I should like it very much indeed," said the elephant's child. "Well," said the bi-coloured python rock snake, "you will find that new nose of yours very useful to spank people with." "Thank you," said the elephant's child. "I'll remember that. And now I think I'll go home to all my dear families and try." So the elephant's child went home across Africa, frisking and whisking his trunk. When he wanted fruit to eat, he pulled fruit down from a tree, instead of waiting for it to fall as he used to do. When he wanted grass, he plucked grass up from the ground, instead of going on his knees as he used to do. When the flies bit him, he broke off the branch of a tree and used it as a fly whisk. And he made himself a new, cool, slushy, squishy mudcap whenever the sun was hot. When he felt lonely, walking through Africa, he sang to himself down his trunk, and the noise was louder than several brass bands. He went especially out of his way to find a broad hippopotamus. She was no relation of his, and he spanked her very hard to make sure that the bi-coloured python rock snake had spoken the truth about his new trunk. The rest of the time he picked up the melon rinds that he had dropped on his way to the Limpopo, for he was a tidy pachyderm. One dark evening he came back to all his dear families, and he coiled up his trunk and said, "How do you do?" They were very glad to see him, and immediately said, "Come here, and be spanked for your satiable curiosity." "Pooh," said the elephant's child, "I don't think you people know anything about spanking, but I do, and I'll show you." Then he uncurled his trunk and knocked 2 of his dear brothers head over heels. "Oh, Bananas," they said, "where did you learn that trick, and what have you done to your nose?" "I've got a new one from the crocodile on the banks of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo River," said the elephant's child. "I asked him what he had for dinner, and he gave me this to keep." "It looks very ugly," said his hairy uncle, the baboon. "It does," said the elephant's child, "but it's very useful." And he picked up his hairy uncle, the baboon, by one hairy leg and hove him into a hornet's nest. Then that bad elephant's child spanked all his dear families for a long time, till they were very, very warm and greatly astonished. He pulled out his tall ostrich aunt's tail feathers, and he caught his tall uncle the giraffe by the hind leg and dragged him through a thorn bush, and he shouted at his broad aunt the hippopotamus and blew bubbles into her ear when she was sleeping in the water after meals, but he never let anyone touch Coca-Cola Bird. At last things grew so exciting that his dear families went off one by one in a hurry to the banks of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, to borrow new noses from the crocodile. And when they came back, Nobody spanked anybody any more, and ever since that day, oh, best beloved, all the elephants you will ever see, besides all those that you won't, have trunks precisely like the trunk of the sociable elephant's child. End of Elephant's Child by Rudyard Kipling, read by Jonathan Jones.
The Tale of the Flopsy Bunnies by Beatrix Potter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Evangeline Wells. It is said that the effect of eating too much lettuce is soporific. I have never felt sleepy after eating lettuces, but then I am not a rabbit. They certainly had a very soporific effect on the Flopsy Bunnies. When Benjamin Bunny grew up, he married his cousin Flopsy. They had a large family, and they were very improvident and cheerful. I do not remember the separate names of their children. They were generally called the Flopsy Bunnies. As there was not always quite enough to eat, Benjamin used to borrow cabbages from Flopsy's brother, Peter Rabbit, who kept a nursery garden. Sometimes Peter Rabbit had no cabbages spare. When this happened, the Flopsy Bunnies went across the field to a rubbish heap in the ditch outside Mr. McGregor's garden. Mr. McGregor's rubbish heap was a mixture. There were jam pots and paper bags and mountains of chopped grass from the mowing machine, which always tasted oily, and some rotten vegetable marrows and an old boot or two. One day, oh joy, there were a quantity of overgrown lettuces which had shot into flower. The Flopsy Bunnies simply stuffed themselves with lettuces. By degrees, one after another, they were overcome with slumber, and lay down in the mown grass. Benjamin was not so much overcome as his children. Before going to sleep, he was sufficiently wide awake to put a paper bag over his head to keep off the flies. The little Flopsy Bunnies slept delightfully in the warm sun. From the lawn beyond the garden came the distant clackety sound of the mowing machine. The blue bottles buzzed around the wall, and a little old mouse picked over the rubbish among the jam pots. I can tell you her name. She was called Thomasina Tittlemaus, a wood mouse with a long tail. She rustled across the paper bag and awakened Benjamin Bunny. The mouse apologized profusely and said that she knew Peter Rabbit. While she and Benjamin were talking, close under the wall, they heard a heavy tread above their heads, and suddenly Mr. McGregor emptied out a sackful of lawn mowings right upon the top of the sleeping Flopsy Bunnies. Benjamin shrank down under his paper bag. The mouse hid in a jam pot. The little rabbits smiled sweetly in their sleep under the shower of grass. They did not awake because the lettuces had been so soporific. They dreamt that their mother, Flopsy, was tucking them up in a hay bed. Mr. McGregor looked down after emptying his sack. He saw some funny little brown tips of ears sticking up through the lawn mowings. He stared at them for some time. Presently a fly settled on one of them, and it moved. Mr. McGregor climbed down to the rubbish heap. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little rabbits, said he as he dropped them into his sack. The Flopsy Bunnies dreamt that their mother was turning them over in their beds. They stirred a little in their sleep, but they still did not wake up. Mr. McGregor tied up the sack and left it on the wall. He went to put away the mowing machine. While he was gone, Mrs. Flopsy Bunny, who had remained at home, came across the field. She looked suspiciously at the sack and wondered where everybody was. Then the mouse came out of her jam pot, and Benjamin took the paper bag off his head, and they told the doleful tale. Benjamin and Flopsy were in despair. They could not undo the string. But Mrs. Tittlemouse was a resourceful person. She nibbled a hole in the bottom corner of the sack. The little rabbits were pulled out and pinched to wake them. Their parents stuffed the empty sack with 3 rotten vegetable marrows, an old blacking brush, and 2 decayed turnips. Then they all hid under a bush and watched for Mr. McGregor. Mr. McGregor came back and picked up the sack and carried it off. He carried it hanging down as if it were rather heavy. The Flopsy bunnies followed at a safe distance. They watched him go into his house, and then they crept up to the window to listen. Mr. McGregor threw down the sack on the stone floor in a way that would have been extremely painful to the Flopsy bunnies if they had happened to have been inside it. They could hear him drag his chair on the flags and chuckle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little rabbits, said Mr. McGregor. Eh? What's that? What have they been spoiling now? Inquired Mrs. McGregor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little fat rabbits, repeated Mr. McGregor, counting on his fingers. 1, 2, 3. Don't you be silly. What do you mean, you old silly man? In the sack. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, replied Mr. McGregor. The youngest Flopsy bunny got upon the window-sill. Mrs. McGregor took hold of the sack and felt it. She said she could feel 6, but they must be old rabbits, because they were so hard and all different shapes. Not fit to eat, but the skins will do fine to line my old cloak. Line your old cloak? Shouted Mr. McGregor. I shall sell them and buy myself baccy. Rabbit tobacco? I shall skin them and cut their heads. Mrs. McGregor untied the sack and put her hand inside. Then she felt the vegetables, and she became very, very angry. She said that Mr. McGregor had done it on purpose. And Mr. McGregor was very angry too. One of the rotten marrows came flying through the kitchen window and hit the youngest Flopsy bunny. It was rather hurt. Then Benjamin and Flopsy thought that it was time to go home. So Mr. McGregor did not get his tobacco, and Mrs. McGregor did not get her rabbit skins. But next Christmas, Thomasina Tittlemouse got a present of enough rabbit wool to make herself a cloak and a hood and a handsome muff and a pair of warm mittens. End of The Tale of the Flopsy Bunnies by Beatrix Potter.
Foxy Grandpa Playing Ball by Bunnies. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Read by Sagarika. The boys teach him how to play baseball. Play ball, said Foxy Grandpa, then gave a little grunt. I'll hit that ball a good one, and do a little stunt. He swung the bat 2 times, but only hit the air. You're nearly out, laughed the boys, but Grandpa didn't care. Said the boys, if you miss this one, you'll surely have to leave. Our old friend Foxy Grandpa had something up his sleeve. Then Grandpa gave an awful swing and hit with all his might. He broke the bat to smithereens. The ball went out of sight. Now Grandpa looked a bit perplexed as the ball was being hunted. I do wish now, said Grandpa, that I had only bunted. So their game of ball was ended, as games of baseball do. Said Grandpa, I do wonder now if the joke was all on you. End of Foxy Grandpa Playing Ball by Bunny.
Snow White and Rose Red by the Brothers Grimm. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. There once was a poor widow who lived in a lonely cottage. In front of the cottage was a garden wherein stood 2 rose trees, one of which bore white and the other red roses. She had 2 children who were like the 2 rose trees. One was called Snow White and the other Rose Red. They were as good and happy, as busy and cheerful as ever 2 children in the world were. Only Snow White was more quiet and gentle than Rose Red. Rose Red liked better to run about in the meadows and fields, seeking flowers and catching butterflies. But Snow White sat at home with her mother and helped her with the housework, or read to her when there was nothing to do. The 2 children were so fond of each other that they always held each other by the hand when they went out together. When Snow White said, "We will not leave each other," Rose Red answered, "Never so long as we live." And their mother would add, "What one has, she must share with the other." They often ran about the forest alone and gathered red berries. Beasts never did them any harm, but came close to them trustfully. The little hare would eat a cabbage leaf out of their hands. The roe grazed by their side. The stag leapt merrily by them, and the birds sat still upon the boughs and sang whatever they knew. No mishap overtook them. If they stayed too late in the forest and night came on, they laid themselves down near one another upon the moss and slept until morning. Their mother knew this and had no worry on their account. One day, when they had spent the night in the wood and the dawn had roused them, they saw a beautiful child in a shining white dress sitting near their bed. He got up and looked quite kindly at them, but said nothing and went away into the forest. And when they looked round, they found that they had been sleeping quite close to a precipice and would certainly have fallen into it in the darkness if they had gone only a few paces farther. And their mother told them that it must have been the angel who watches over good children. Snow White and Rose Red kept their mother's little cottage so neat that it was a pleasure to look inside it. In the summer, Rose Red took care of the house, and every morning laid a wreath of flowers by her mother's bed before she awoke, in which was a rose from each tree. In the winter, Snow White lit the fire and hung the kettle on the hook. The kettle was of copper and shone gold, so brightly was it polished. In the evening, when the snowflakes fell, the mother said, "Go, Snow White, and bolt the door." And then they sat round the hearth, and the mother took her spectacles and read aloud out of the large book. The 2 girls listened as they sat and span, and close by them lay a lamb upon the floor, and behind them upon a perch sat a white dove, with its head hidden beneath its wings. One evening, as they were thus sitting comfortably together, someone knocked at the door, as if he wished to be let in. The mother said, "Quick, Rose Red, open the door. It must be a traveler who is seeking shelter." Rose Red went and pushed back the bolt, thinking that it was a poor man, but it was not. It was a bear that stretched his broad black head within the door. Rose Red screamed and sprang back. The lamb bleated. The dove fluttered, and Snow White hid herself behind her mother's bed. But the bear began to speak and said, "Do not be afraid. I will do you no harm. I am half frozen, and only want to warm myself a little beside you." "Poor bear," said the mother, "lie down by the fire, only take care that you do not burn your coat." Then she cried, "Snow White, Rose Red, come out. The bear will do you no harm. He means well." So they both came out, and by the lamb and dove came nearer, and were not afraid of him. The bear said, "Here, children, knock the snow out of my coat a little." So they brought the broom and swept the bear's hide clean, and he stretched himself by the fire and growled contentedly and comfortably. It was not long before they grew quite at home and played tricks with their clumsy guest. They tugged at his hair with their hands, put their feet upon his back, and rolled him about. Or they took a hazel switch and beat him, and when he growled, they laughed. But the bear took it all in good part. Only when they were too rough he called out, "Leave me alive, children." "Snowy White, Rosy Red, will you beat your lover dead?" When it was bedtime and the others went to sleep, the mother said to the bear, "You may lie there by the hearth, and then you will be safe from the cold and the bad weather." As soon as the day dawned, the 2 children let him out, and he trotted across the snow into the forest. Henceforth the bear came every evening at the same time, laid himself down by the hearth, and let the children amuse themselves with him as much as they liked. They got so used to him that the doors were never fastened until their black friend had arrived. When the spring was come and all outside was green, the bear said one morning to Snow White, "Now I must go away. I cannot come back for the whole summer." "Where are you going then, dear bear?" asked Snow White. "I must go into the forest and guard my treasures from the wicked dwarfs. In the winter, when the earth is frozen hard, they are obliged to stay below and cannot work their way through. But now, when the sun has thawed and warmed the earth, they break through it and come to pry and steal. And what once gets into their hands and in their caves does not easily see daylight again." Snow White was very sorry for his going away, and as she unbolted the door for him and the bear was hurrying out, he caught against the bolt and a piece of his hairy coat was torn off. It seemed to Snow White as if she saw gold shining through it, but she was not sure about it. The bear ran away quickly and was soon out of sight behind the trees. A short time afterward, the mother sent her children into the forest to get firewood. There they found a big tree which lay felled on the ground, and close by the trunk something was jumping backward and forward in the grass, but they could not make out what it was. When they came nearer, they saw a dwarf with an old withered face and a snow-white beard a yard long. The end of the beard was caught in the crevice of a tree, and the little fellow was jumping backward and forward like a dog tied to a rope and did not know what to do. He glared at the girls with his fiery red eyes and cried, "Why do you stand there? Can you not come here and help me?" "What are you about there, little man?" asked Rose Red. "You stupid prying goose," answered the dwarf. "I was going to split the tree to get a little wood for cooking. The little bit of food that one of us wants gets burned up quickly with thick logs. We do not swallow so much as you coarse, greedy folks. I had just driven the wedge safely in, and everything was going as I wished. But the wretched wood was too smooth and suddenly sprang asunder. The tree closed so quickly that I could not pull out my beautiful white beard. So now it is tight in, and I cannot get away, and you silly, sleek, milk-faced things laugh. Ugh, how odious you are." The children tried very hard, but they could not pull the beard out. It was caught too fast. "I will run and fetch someone," said Rose Red. "You senseless goose," snarled the dwarf. "Why should you fetch someone? You are already too many for me. Can you not think of something better?" "Don't be impatient," said Snow White. "I will help you." And she pulled her scissors out of her pocket and cut off the end of the beard. As soon as the dwarf felt himself free, he grabbed a bag which lay amongst the roots of the tree and which was full of gold, and lifted it up, grumbling to himself, "Rude people to cut off a piece of my fine beard. Bad luck to you." And then he swung the bag upon his back and went off without even once looking at the children. Some time after that, Snow White and Rose Red went to catch a dish of fish. As they came near the brook, they saw something like a large grasshopper jumping toward the water, as if it were going to leap in. They ran to it and found it was the dwarf. "Where are you going?" said Rose Red. "You surely don't want to go into the water." "I am not such a fool," cried the dwarf. "Don't you see that the accursed fish wants to pull me in?" The little man had been sitting there fishing, and unluckily the wind had twisted his beard with the fishing line. Just then a big fish bit, and the feeble creature had not the strength to pull it out. The fish kept the upper hand and was pulling the dwarf toward him. He held on to the reeds and rushes, but it was of little good. He was forced to follow the fish and was in great danger of being dragged into the water. The girls came just in time. They held him fast and tried to free his beard from the line, but all in vain. Beard and line were entangled fast together. Nothing was left but to bring out the scissors and cut the beard, whereby a small part of it was lost. When the dwarf saw that, he screamed out, "Is it civil, you toadstool, to disfigure one's face? Was it not enough to clip off the end of my beard? Now you have cut off the best part of it. I cannot let myself be seen by my people. I wish you had made to run the soles off your shoes." Then he took out a sack of pearls which lay in the rushes, and without saying a word more, He dragged it away and disappeared behind a stone. It happened soon afterward. The mother sent the 2 children to the town to buy needles and thread and laces and ribbons. The road led them across a heath upon which huge pieces of rock lay strewn about. They now noticed a large bird hovering in the air, flying slowly round and round above them. It sank lower and lower, and at last settled near a rock not far off. Directly afterward they heard a loud, piteous cry. They ran up and saw, with horror, that the eagle had seized their old acquaintance, the dwarf, and was going to carry him off. The children, full of pity, at once took tight hold of the little man and pulled against the eagle so long that he let his booty go. As soon as the dwarf had recovered from his first fright, he cried with a shrill voice, "Could you not have done it more carefully? You dragged at my brown coat, so that it is all torn and full of holes. You helpless, clumsy creatures." Then he took up a sack full of precious stones and slipped away again under the rock into his hole. The girls, who by this time were used to his thanklessness, went on their way and did their business in town. As they crossed the heath again on their way home, they surprised the dwarf, who had emptied out his bag of precious stones in a clean spot and had not thought that any one of them would come there at such a late hour. The evening sun shone upon the brilliant stones. They glittered and sparkled with all colors so beautifully that the children stood still and looked at them. "Why do you stand gaping there?" cried the dwarf, and his ashen-gray face became copper-red with rage. He was going on with his bad words when a loud growling was heard, and a black bear came trotting toward them out of the forest. The dwarf sprang up in fright, but could not get to his cave, for the bear was already close. Then in the fear of his heart he cried, "Dear Mr. Bear, spare me. I will give you all my treasures. Look, the beautiful jewels lying there. Grant me my life." "What do you want with such a slender little fellow as I? You would not feel me between your teeth. Come, take these 2 wicked girls. They are tender morsels for you, fat as young quails. For mercy's sake, eat them." The bear took no heed of his words, but gave the wicked creature a single blow with his paw, and he did not move again. The girls had run away, but the bear called to them, "Snow White and Rose Red, do not be afraid. Wait, I will come with you." Then they knew his voice and waited. And when he came up to them, suddenly his bear skin fell off, and he stood there, a handsome man clothed all in gold. "I am a king's son," he said, "and I was bewitched by that wicked dwarf who had stolen my treasures. I have had to run about the forest as a savage bear until I was freed by his death. Now he has got his well-deserved punishment." Snow White was married to him, and Rose Red to his brother. They divided between them the great treasure which the dwarf had gathered together in his cave. The old mother lived peacefully and happily with her children for many years. She took the 2 rose trees with her, and they stood before her window, and every year bore the most beautiful roses, white and red. End of Snow White and Rose Red by the Brothers Grimm. Read by Dianne Erdmann.
The Tale of Mrs Tiggy-Winkle by Beatrix Potter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read to you by Evangeline Wells. Once upon a time there was a little girl called Lucy, who lived at a farm called Littletown. She was a good little girl, only she was always losing her pocket handkerchiefs. One day little Lucy came into the farmyard crying. Oh, she did cry so. "I've lost my pocket handkin, 3 handkins and a penny. Have you seen them, Tabby Kitten?" The kitten went on washing her white paws, so Lucy asked a speckled hen, "Sally Hennypenny, have you found 3 pocket handkins?" But the speckled hen ran into a barn clucking, "I go barefoot, barefoot, barefoot." And then Lucy asked Cock Robin, sitting on a twig. Cock Robin looked sideways at Lucy with his bright black eye, and he flew over a stile and away. Lucy climbed upon the stile, and looked up at the hill behind Littletown. A hill that goes up, up, into the clouds as though it had no top. And a great way up the hillside she thought she saw some white things spread upon the grass. Lucy scrambled up the hill as fast as her stout legs would carry her. She ran along a steep pathway, up and up, until Littletown was right away down below. She could have dropped a pebble down the chimney. Presently she came to a spring, bubbling out from the hillside. Someone had stood a tin can upon a stone to catch the water, but the water was already running over, for the can was no bigger than an egg cup. And where the sand upon the path was wet, there were footmarks of a very small person. Lucy ran on and on. The path ended under a big rock. The grass was short and green, and there were clothes props cut from the bracken stems, with lines of plaited rushes and a heap of tiny clothespins, but no pocket handkerchiefs. But there was something else, a door, straight into the hill, and inside it someone was singing. Lily white and clean, oh, with frills between, oh, smooth and hot, red rusty spot, never here be seen, oh. Lucy knocked, once, twice, and interrupted the song. A little frightened voice called out, "Who's that?" Lucy opened the door, and what do you think was there inside the hill? A nice clean kitchen with a flagged floor and wooden beams, just like any other farm kitchen. Only the ceiling was so low that Lucy's head nearly touched it, and the pots and pans were small, and so was everything there. There was a nice hot singy smell, and at the table, with an iron in her hand, stood a very stout, short person, staring anxiously at Lucy. Her print gown was tucked up, and she was wearing a large apron over her striped petticoat. Her little black nose went sniffle, sniffle, snuffle, and her eyes went twinkle, twinkle. And underneath her cap, where Lucy had yellow curls, that little person had prickles. "Who are you?" said Lucy. "Have you seen my pocket handkins?" The little person made a bob curtsy. "Oh, yes, if you please 'em. My name is Mrs Tiggy-Winkle. Oh, yes, if you please 'em. I'm an excellent clear starcher." And she took something out of a clothes basket and spread it on the ironing blanket. "What's that thing?" said Lucy. "That's not my pocket handkin." "Oh, no, if you please 'em. That's a little scarlet waistcoat belonging to Cock Robin." And she ironed it and folded it and put it on one side. Then she took something else off a clothes horse. "That isn't my pinny," said Lucy. "Oh, no, if you please 'em. That's a damask tablecloth belonging to Jenny Wren. Look how it's stained with currant wine. It's very bad to wash," said Mrs Tiggy-Winkle. Mrs Tiggy-Winkle's nose went sniffle, sniffle, snuffle, and her eyes went twinkle, twinkle, and she fetched another hot iron from the fire. "There's one of my pocket handkins," cried Lucy, "and there's my pinny." Mrs Tiggy-Winkle ironed it and gophered it, and shook out the frills. "Oh, that is lovely," said Lucy. "And what are those long yellow things with fingers like gloves?" "Oh, that's a pair of stockings belonging to Sally Hennypenny. Look how she's worn the heels out with scratching in the yard." "She'll very soon go barefoot," said Mrs Tiggy-Winkle. "Why, there's another hankersniff, but it isn't mine, it's red." "Oh, no, if you please 'em. That one belongs to old Mrs Rabbit, and it did so smell of onions. I've had to wash it separately. I can't get out the smell." "There's another of mine," said Lucy. "What are those funny little white things?" "That's a pair of mittens belonging to Tabby Kitten. I only have to iron them. She washes them herself." "There's my last pocket handkin," said Lucy. "And what are you dipping into the basin of starch?" "They're little dicky shirt fronts belonging to Tom Titmouse. Most terrible particular," said Mrs Tiggy-Winkle. Now I've finished my ironing, I'm going to air some clothes." "What are these dear soft fluffy things?" said Lucy. "Oh, those are woolly coats belonging to the little lambs at Skelgill." "Will their jackets take off?" asked Lucy. "Oh, yes, if you please 'em. Look at their sheep mark on the shoulder, and here's one marked for Gatesgarth, and 3 that come from Littletown. They're always marked at washing," said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. And she hung up all sorts and sizes of clothes, small brown coats of mice, and one velvety black moleskin waistcoat, and a red tailcoat with no tail belonging to Squirrel Nutkin, and a very much shrunk blue jacket belonging to Peter Rabbit, and a petticoat not marked that had gone lost in the washing, and at last the basket was empty. Then Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle made tea, a cup for herself and a cup for Lucy. They sat before the fire on a bench and looked sideways at one another. Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle's hand holding the teacup was very brown, and very, very wrinkly with the soap suds, and all through her gown and her cap there were hairpins sticking wrong end out, so that Lucy didn't like to sit too near her. When they had finished tea, they tied up the clothes in bundles, and Lucy's pocket handkerchiefs were folded up inside her clean pinny, and fastened with a silver safety pin. And then they made up the fire with turf, and came out and locked the door, and hid the key under the door-sill. Then away down the hill trotted Lucy and Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle with the bundle of clothes. All the way down the path little animals came out of the fern to meet them. The very first that they met were Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny, and she gave them their nice clean clothes, and all the little animals and birds were so very much obliged to dear Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle, so that at the bottom of the hill, when they came to the stile, there was nothing left to carry except Lucy's one little bundle. Lucy scrambled up the stile with the bundle in her hand, and then she turned to say good-bye, and to thank the washerwoman. But what a very odd thing! Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle had not waited either for thanks or for the washing bill. She was running, running, running up the hill, and where was her white frilled cap, and her shawl, and her gown, and her petticoat? And how small she had grown, and how brown, and covered with prickles! Why, Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle was nothing but a hedgehog. Now, some people say that little Lucy had been asleep upon the stile, but then how could she have found 3 clean pocket handkins and a pinny pinned with a silver safety pin? Besides, I have seen that door into the back of the hill called Cat Bell's, and besides, I am very well acquainted with dear Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. End of The Tale of Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle by Beatrix Potter. The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read to you by Florence Wells. Once upon a time there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She brought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But at the end of the cucumber frame
Who should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees, planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop! Thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether, if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter. But Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in, if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden under a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each one. Presently Peter sneezed. "Cat-choo!" Mr. McGregor was after him no time, and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time he began to wander about, going lippity, lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it would be best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttled underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some blackcurrant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked back behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in the fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end of the Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter.
The Pie in the Patty Pan by Beatrice Potter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Natalia. Once upon a time there was a pussy cat called Ruby, who invited a little dog called Duchess to tea. "Come in good time, my dear Duchess," said Ruby's letter, "and we will have something so very nice. I am baking it in a pie dish with a pink rim. You never tasted anything so good, and you shall eat it all." "I will eat muffins, my dear Duchess," wrote Ruby. Duchess read the letter and wrote an answer. "I will come with much pleasure at 4:15. But it is very strange. I was just going to invite you to come here to supper, my dear Ruby, to eat something most delicious." "I will come very punctually, my dear Ruby," wrote Duchess, and then at the end she added, "I hope it isn't mouse." And then she thought that it did not look quite polite, so she scratched out "isn't mouse" and changed it to "I hope it will be fine," and she gave her letter to the postman. But she thought a great deal about Ruby's pie, and she read Ruby's letter over and over again. "I am dreadfully afraid it will be mouse," said Duchess to herself. "I really just couldn't eat mouse pie. And I shall have to eat it because it is a party, and my pie was going to be veal and ham. A pink and white pie dish, and so is mine, just like Ruby's dishes. They were both bought at Tabitha Twitchit's." Duchess went into her larder and took the pie off a shelf and looked at it. "It is all ready to put into the oven, such lovely pie crust, and I put it in a little tin patty pan to hold up the crust, and I made a hole in the middle with a fork to let out the steam. Oh, I do wish I could eat my own pie instead of a pie made of mouse." Duchess considered and read Ruby's letter again. "A pink and white pie dish, and you shall eat it all. You means me. Then Ruby is not even going to taste the pie herself. A pink and white pie dish. Ruby is sure to go out to buy the muffins. Oh, what a good idea. Why shouldn't I rush along and put my pie into Ruby's oven when Ruby isn't there?" Duchess was quite delighted with her own cleverness. Ruby in the meantime had received Duchess's answer, and as soon as she was sure that the little dog could come, she popped her pie into the oven. There were 2 ovens, one above the other. Some other knobs and handles were only ornamental and not intended to open. Ruby put the pie into the lower oven. The door was very stiff. "The top oven bakes too quickly," said Ruby to herself. "It is a pie of the most delicate and tender mouse, minced up with bacon, and I have taken out all the bones, because Duchess nearly did choke herself with a fishbone last time I gave a party. She eats a little fast, rather big mouthfuls, but a most genteel and elegant little dog, infinitely superior company to cousin Tabitha Twitchit." Ruby put on some coal and swept up the hearth. Then she went out with a can to the well, for water to fill up the kettle. Then she began to set the room in order, for it was the sitting room as well as the kitchen. She shook the mats out at the front door and put them straight. The hearth rug was a rabbit skin. She dusted the clock and the ornaments on the mantelpiece, and she polished and rubbed the tables and chairs. Then she spread a very clean white tablecloth and set out her best china tea set, which she took out of a wall cupboard near the fireplace. The teacups were white with a pattern of pink roses, and the dinner plates were white and blue. When Ruby had laid the table, she took a jug and a blue and white dish, and went out down the field to the farm to fetch milk and butter. When she came back, she peeped into the bottom oven. The pie looked very comfortable. Ruby put on her shawl and bonnet and went out again with a basket to the village shop to buy a packet of tea, a pound of lump sugar, and a pot of marmalade. And just at the same time Duchess came out of her house at the other end of the village. Ruby met Duchess halfway down the street, also carrying a basket covered with a cloth. They only bowed to one another. They did not speak, because they were going to have a party. As soon as Duchess had got round the corner of sight, she simply ran straight away to Ruby's house. Ruby went into the shop and bought what she required, and came out after a pleasant gossip with cousin Tabitha Twitchit.
Cousin Tabitha was disdainful afterwards in conversation. A little dog, indeed! Just as if there were no cats in Sorry. And a pie for afternoon tea! The very idea!" said Cousin Tabitha Twitchit. Ruby went on to Timothy Baker's and bought the muffins. Then she went home. There seemed to be a sort of scuffling noise in the back passage as she was coming in at the front door. "I trust that is not that pie. The spoons are locked up, however," said Ruby. But there was nobody there. Ruby opened the bottom oven door with some difficulty and turned the pie. There began to be a pleasing smell of baked mouse. Duchess, in the meantime, had slipped out the back door. "It is a very odd thing that Ruby's pie was not in the oven when I put mine in, and I can't find it anywhere. I have looked all over the house. I put my pie into a nice hot oven at the top. I could not turn any of the other handles. I think they are all shams," said Duchess. "But I wish I could have removed the pie made of mouse. I cannot think what she has done with it. I heard Ruby coming and I had to run out by the back door." Duchess went home and brushed her beautiful black coat. Then she picked a bunch of flowers in her garden as a present for Ruby, and passed the time until the clock struck 4. Ruby, having assured herself by careful search that there was really no one hiding in the cupboard or in the larder, went upstairs to change her dress. She put on a lilac silk gown for the party, and an embroidered muslin apron and tippet. "It is very strange," said Ruby. "I did not think I left that drawer pulled out. Has somebody been trying on my mittens?" She came downstairs again and made the tea and put the teapot on the hob. She peeped again into the bottom oven. The pie had become a lovely brown, and it was steaming hot. She sat down before the fire to wait for the little dog. "I am glad I used the bottom oven," said Ruby. "The top one would certainly have been much too hot. I wonder why that cupboard door was open. Can there really have been someone in the house?" Very punctually at 4 o'clock, Duchess started to go to the party. She ran so fast through the village that she was too early, and she had to wait a little while in the lane that leads down to Ruby's house. "I wonder if Ruby has taken my pie out of the oven yet," said Duchess, "and whatever can have become of the other pie made of mouse." At 4:15 to the minute, there came a most genteel little tap-tappity. "Is Mrs. Ribston home?" inquired Duchess in the porch. "Come in, and how do you do, my dear Duchess?" cried Ruby. "I hope I see you well." "Quite well, I thank you. And how do you do, my dear Ruby?" "I have brought you some flowers. What a delicious smell of pie!" "Oh, what lovely flowers! Yes, it is mouse and bacon." "Do not talk about food, my dear Ruby," said Duchess. "What a lovely white tea-cloth! Is it done to a turn? Is it still in the oven?" "I think it wants another 5 minutes," said Ruby. "Just a shade longer. I will pour out the tea while we wait. Do you take sugar, my dear Duchess?" "Oh, yes, please, dear Ruby. And may I have a lump upon my nose?" "With pleasure, my dear Duchess. How beautifully you beg! Oh, how sweetly pretty!" Duchess sat up with the sugar on her nose and sniffed. "How good that pie says! I do love veal and ham. I mean to say, mouse and bacon." She dropped the sugar in confusion and had to go hunting under the tea-table, so she did not see which oven Ruby opened in order to get out the pie. Ruby set the pie upon the table. There was a very savory smell. Duchess came out from under the tablecloth munching sugar and sat up on a chair. "I will first cut the pie for you. I'm going to have muffin and marmalade," said Ruby. "Do you really prefer muffin? Mind the patty pan." "I beg your pardon," said Ruby. "May I pass you the marmalade?" said Duchess hurriedly. The pie proved extremely toothsome and the muffins light and hot. They disappeared rapidly, especially the pie. "I think," thought the Duchess to herself, "I think it would be wiser if I helped myself to pie," although Ruby did not seem to notice anything when she was cutting it. "What very small fine pieces it is cooked into. I did not remember that I had minced it up so fine. I suppose this is a quicker oven than my own. How fast Duchess is eating," thought Ruby to herself, as she buttered her 5th muffin. The pie dish was emptying rapidly. Duchess had had 4 helps already and was fumbling with the spoon. "A little more bacon, my dear Duchess?" said Ruby. "Thank you, my dear Ruby. I was only feeling for the patty pan." "The patty pan, my dear Duchess." "The patty pan that held up the pie crust," said Duchess, blushing under her black coat. "Oh, I didn't put one in, my dear Duchess," said Ruby. "I don't think that it is necessary in pies made of mouse." Duchess fumbled with the spoon. "I can't find it," she said anxiously. "There isn't a patty pan," said Ruby, looking perplexed. "Yes, indeed, my dear Ruby. Where can it have gone to?" said Duchess. "There most certainly is not one, my dear Duchess. I disapprove of tin articles in puddings and pies. It is most undesirable, especially when people swallow in lumps," she added in a lower voice. Duchess looked very much alarmed, and continued to scoop the inside of the pie dish. "My great-aunt Squinty, grandmother of Cousin Tabitha Twitchit, died of a thimble in a Christmas plum pudding. I never put any article of metal in my puddings or pies." Duchess looked aghast, and tilted up the pie dish. "I have only 4 patty pans, and they are all in the cupboard." Duchess set up a howl. "I shall die! I shall die! I have swallowed a patty pan! Oh, my dear Ruby, I do feel so ill." "It is impossible, my dear Duchess. There is not a patty pan." Duchess moaned and whined and rocked herself about. "Oh, I feel so dreadful! I have swallowed a patty pan." "There was nothing in the pie," said Ruby severely. "Yes, there was, my dear Ruby. I am sure I have swallowed it." "Let me prop you up with a pillow, my dear Duchess. Where do you think you feel it?" "Oh, I do feel so ill, all over me, my dear Ruby. I have swallowed a large tin patty pan with a sharp scalloped edge." "Shall I run for the doctor?" "I will just lock up the spoons." "Oh, yes, yes, fetch Dr. Maggotty, my dear Ruby. He is a pie himself, and he will certainly understand." Ruby settled Duchess in an armchair before the fire, and went out and hurried to the village to look for the doctor. She found him at the smithy. He was occupied in putting rusty nails into a bottle of ink which he had obtained at the post office. "Gammon, ha, ha!" he said, with his head on one side. Ruby explained that her guest had swallowed a patty pan. "Spinach, ha, ha!" said he, and accompanied her with alacrity. He hopped so fast that Ruby had to run. It was most conspicuous. All the village could see that Ruby was fetching the doctor. "I knew they would overeat themselves," said Cousin Tabitha Twitchit. But while Ruby had been hunting for the doctor, a curious thing had happened to Duchess, who had been left by herself, sitting before the fire, sighing and groaning and feeling very unhappy. "How could I have swallowed it? Such a large thing as a patty pan!" She went up and went to the table and felt inside the pie dish again with the spoon. "No, there is no patty pan. I put one in, and nobody has eaten pie except me, so I must have swallowed it." She sat down again and stared mournfully at the grate. The fire crackled and danced, and something sizzled. Duchess started. She opened the door of the top oven, and out came a rich steamy flavor of veal and ham, and there stood a fine brown pie, and through a hole in the crust there was a glimpse of a little tin patty pan. Duchess drew a long breath. "Then I must have been eating mouse. No wonder I feel ill. But perhaps I should feel worse if I had really swallowed a patty pan," Duchess reflected. "What a very awkward thing to have to explain to Ruby. I think I will put my pie in the back yard, and say nothing about it. When I go home I will run round and take it away." She put it outside the back door, and sat down again by the fire and shut her eyes. When Ruby arrived with the doctor, she seemed fast asleep. "Gammon, ha, ha!" said the doctor. "I am feeling very much better," said Duchess, waking up with a jump. "I am truly glad to hear it. He has brought you a pill, my dear Duchess." "I think I should feel quite well if he only felt my pulse," said Duchess, backing away from the magpie. "It is only a bread pill. You had much better take it. Drink a little milk, my dear Duchess." "Gammon, gammon," said the doctor, while Duchess coughed and choked. "Don't say that again," said Ruby, losing her temper. "Here, take this bread and jam, and go out into the yard." "Gammon and spinach, ha, ha, ha!" shouted Dr. Maggotty triumphantly outside the back door. "I am feeling very much better, my dear Ruby," said Duchess. "Do you not think that I had better go home before it gets dark?" "Perhaps it might be wise, my dear Duchess. I will lend you a nice warm shawl, and you shall take my arm." "I would not trouble you for worlds. I feel wonderfully better. one pill of Dr. Maggotty. Indeed, it is most admirable, if it has cured you of a patty pan. I will call directly after breakfast to ask how you have slept." Ruby and Duchess said good-bye affectionately, and Duchess started home. Halfway up the lane she stopped and looked back. Ruby had gone in and shut her door. Duchess slipped through the fence and ran round to the back of Ruby's house and peeped into the yard. On top of the pigsty sat Dr. Maggotty and 3 jackdaws. The jackdaws were eating pie crust, and the magpie was drinking gravy out of a patty pan. "Gammon! Ha! ha!" he shouted when he saw Duchess's little black nose peeping around the corner. Duchess ran home feeling uncommonly silly. When Ruby came out for a pail full of water to wash up the tea things, she found a pink and white pie dish lying smashed in the middle of the yard. The patty pan was under the pump where Dr. Maggotty had considerately left it. Ruby stared with amazement. Did you ever see the like? So there really was a patty pan, but my patty pans are all in the kitchen cupboard. Well, I never did. Next time I want to give a party, I will invite Cousin Tabitha Twitchit. The End of The Pie and the Patty Pan by Beatrix Potter. Recording by Natalia.
The Tale of Squirrel Nutkin by Beatrix Potter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. This is a tale about a tale that belonged to a little red squirrel, and his name was Nutkin. He had a brother called Twinkleberry and a great many cousins. They lived in a wood at the edge of a lake. In the middle of the lake there is an island covered with trees and nut bushes, and amongst those trees stands a hollow oak tree, which is the house of an owl who is called Old Brown. One autumn, when the nuts were ripe and the leaves on the hazel bushes were golden and green, Nutkin and Twinkleberry and all the other little squirrels came out of the wood and down to the edge of the lake. They made little rafts out of twigs, and they paddled away over to the water to Owl Island to gather nuts. Each squirrel had a little sack and a large oar, and spread out his tail for a sail. They also took with them an offering of 3 fat mice as a present for Old Brown, and put them down upon his doorstep. Then Twinkleberry and the other little squirrels each made a low bow and said politely, "Old Mr. Brown, will you favor us with permission to gather nuts upon your island?" But Nutkin was excessively impertinent in his manners. He bobbed up and down like a little red cherry, singing, riddle me, rot-tot-tote, a wee little man in a red, red coat, a staff in his hand and a stone in his throat. If you'll tell me this riddle, I'll give you a groat. Now this riddle is as old as the hills. Mr. Brown paid no attention whatever to Nutkin. He shut his eyes obstinately and went to sleep. The squirrels filled their little sacks with nuts and sailed away home in the evening. But the next morning they all came back again to Owl Island, and Twinkleberry and the others brought a fine fat mole and laid it on the stone in front of Old Brown's doorway and said, "Mr. Brown, will you favor us with your gracious permission to gather some more nuts?" But Nutkin, who had no respect, began to dance up and down, tickling old Mr. Brown with a nettle and singing, "Old Mr. B, riddle me ree, hitty-pitty within the wall, hitty-pitty without the wall. If you touch hitty-pitty will bite you." Mr. Brown woke up suddenly and carried the mole into his house. He shut the door in Nutkin's face. Presently a little thread of blue smoke from a wood fire came up from the top of the tree, and Nutkin peeped through the keyhole and sang, "A house full, a hole full, and you cannot gather a bowl full." The squirrels searched for nuts all over the island and filled their little sacks. But Nutkin gathered oak apples, yellow and scarlet, and sat upon a beech stump playing marbles and watching the door of old Mr. Brown. On the 3rd day the squirrels got up very early and went fishing. They caught 7 fat minnows as a present for Old Brown. They paddled over the lake and landed under a crooked chestnut tree on Owl Island. Twinkleberry and 6 other little squirrels each carried a fat minnow, but Nutkin, who had no nice manners, brought no present at all. He ran in front, singing, "The man in the wilderness said to me, 'How many strawberries grow in the sea?' I answered him as I thought good, 'As many red herrings as grow in the wood.'" But old Mr. Brown took no interest in riddles, not even when the answer was provided for him. On the 4th day, the squirrels brought a present of 6 fat beetles, which were as good as plums in plum pudding for Old Brown. Each beetle was wrapped up carefully in a dock leaf, fastened with a pine needle pin. But Nutkin sang as rudely as ever, "Old Mr. B, riddle me ree, flower of England, fruit of Spain, met together in a shower of rain, put in a bag tied around with a string. If you tell me this riddle, I'll give you a ring," which was ridiculous of Nutkin, because he had not given any ring to Old Brown. The other squirrels hunted up and down the nut bushes, but Nutkin gathered robin pincushions off of a briar bush and stuck them full of pine needle pins. On the 5th day, the squirrels brought a present of wild honey. It was so sweet and sticky that they licked their fingers as they put it down upon the stone. They had stolen it out of a bumblebee's nest on the tippity-top of the hill. But Nutkin skipped up and down, singing, "Hum-a-bum, buzz, buzz, hum-a-bum, buzz. As I went over Tippletine, I met a flock of bonny swine, some yellow-nacked and some yellow-backed. They were the very bosunest swine that ever went over Tippletine." Old Mr. Brown turned up his eye in disgust at the impertinence of Nutkin, but he ate up the honey. The squirrels filled their little sacks with nuts, but Nutkin sat upon a big flat rock and played 9 pins with a crab apple and green fir cones. On the 6th day, which was Saturday, the squirrels came again for the last time. They brought a new laid egg in a little rush basket as a last parting present for Old Brown, but Nutkin ran in front laughing and shouting, "Humpty Dumpty lies in the beck with a white counterpane around his neck. 40 doctors and 40 wrights cannot put Humpty Dumpty to rights." Now, old Mr. Brown took an interest in eggs. He opened one eye and shut it again, but still he did not speak. Nutkin became more and more impertinent. "Old Mr. B, old Mr. B, hickamore, hackamore on the king's kitchen door. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't drive hickamore, hackamore off the king's kitchen door." Nutkin danced up and down like a sunbeam, but still Old Brown said nothing at all. Nutkin began again. "Arthur O'Bower has broken his band. He comes roaring up the land. The King of Scots with all his power cannot turn Arthur off the bower." Nutkin made a whirring noise to sound like the wind, and he took a running jump right onto the head of Old Brown. Then all at once there was a flutterment and a scufflement and a loud squeak. The other squirrels scurried away into the bushes. When they came back very cautiously, peeping round the tree, there was Old Brown sitting on his doorstep, quite still with his eyes closed, as if nothing had happened. But Nutkin was in his waistcoat pocket. This looks like the end of the story, but it isn't. Old Brown carried Nutkin into his house and held him up by the tail, intending to skin him. But Nutkin pulled so very hard that his tail broke in two, and he dashed up the staircase and escaped out the attic window. And to this day, if you meet Nutkin up a tree and ask him a riddle, he will throw sticks at you and stamp his feet and scold and shout, "Cuck, cuck, cuck, cruck, cuck, cuck." End of The Tale of Squirrel Nutkin by Beatrix Potter.
The Story of a Fierce Bad Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by the Countess. This is a fierce bad rabbit. Look at his savage whiskers, his claws, and his turned-up tail. This is a nice gentle rabbit. His mother has given him a carrot. The bad rabbit would like some carrot. He doesn't say please, he takes it.
and he scratches the good rabbit very badly. The good rabbit creeps away and hides in a hole. It feels sad. This is a man with a gun. He sees something sitting on a bench. He thinks it's a very funny bird. He comes creeping up behind the trees, and then he shoots. Bang! This is what happens. But this is all he finds on the bench when he rushes up with his gun. The good rabbit peeps out of its hole, and it sees the bad rabbit tearing past without any tail or whiskers. End of the story of the Fierce Bad Rabbit by Beatrix Potter.
The Story of the First Hummingbird by Florence Holbrook. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Part 1. The Great Fire Mountain. Long, long ago, when the earth was very young, 2 hunters were traveling through the forest. They had been on the track of a deer for many days, and they were now far away from the village where they lived. The sun went down and night came on. It was dark and gloomy, but over in the western sky there came a bright light. "It is the moon," said one. "No," said the other. "We have watched many and many a night to see the great round moon rise above the trees. That is not the moon." "Is it the northern lights?" "No, the northern lights are not like this, and it is not a comet. What can it be?" It is no wonder that the hunters were afraid, for the flames flared red over the sky like a wigwam on fire. Thick blue smoke floated above the flames and hit the shining stars. "Do the flames and smoke come from the wigwam of the Great Spirit?" asked one. "I fear that he is angry with his children, and that the flames are his fiery war clubs," whispered the other. No sleep came to their eyes. All night long they watched and wondered, and waited in terror for the morning. When morning came, the 2 hunters were still watching the sky. Little by little they saw that there was a high mountain in the west where the light had been, and above the mountain floated a dark blue smoke. "Come," said one, "we will go and see what it is." They walked and walked till they came close to the mountain, and then they saw fire shining through the seams of the rocks. "It is a mountain of fire," one whispered. "Shall we go on?" "We will," said the other, and they went higher and higher up the mountain. At last they stood upon its highest point. "Now we know the secret," they cried. "Our people will be glad when they hear this." Swiftly they went home through the forest to their own village. "We have found a wonder," they cried. "We have found the home of the fire spirit. We know where she keeps her flames to help the Great Spirit and his children. It is a mountain of fire. Blue smoke rises above it night and day, for its heart is a fiery sea, and on the sea the red flames leap and dance. Come with us to the wonderful mountain of fire." The people of the village had been cold in the winter nights, and they cried, "Oh, brothers, your words are good. We will move our lodges to the foot of the magic mountain. We can light our wigwam fires from its flames, and we shall not fear that we shall perish in the long, cold nights of winter." So the Indians went to live at the foot of the fire mountain, and when the cold nights came, they said, "We are not cold, for the spirit of fire is our good friend, and she keeps her people from perishing." Part 2. The Frolic of the Flames. For many and many a moon the people of the village lived at the foot of the great fire mountain. On summer evenings the children watched the light, and when a child asked, "Father, what makes it?" the father said, "That is the home of the Great Spirit of Fire, who's our good friend." Then all in the little village went to sleep and lay safely on their beds till the coming of the morning. But one night, when all the people in the village were asleep, the flames in the mountain had a great frolic. They danced upon the sea of fire as warriors dance the war dance. They seized great rocks and threw them at the sky. The smoke above them hit the stars. The mountain throbbed and trembled. Higher and still higher sprang the dancing flames. At last they leaped clear above the highest point of the mountain and started down it in a river of red fire. Then the gentle spirit of fire called, "Come back, my flames, come back again. The people in the village will not know that you are in a frolic, and they will be afraid." The flames did not heed her words, and the river of fire ran on and on, straight down the mountain. The flowers in its pathway perished. It leaped upon great trees and bore them to the earth. It drove the birds from their nests, and they fluttered about in the thick smoke. It hunted the wild creatures of the forest from the thickets where they hid, and they fled before it in terror. At last one of the warriors in the village awoke. The thick smoke was in his nostrils. In his ears was the war cry of the flames. He sprang to the door of his lodge and saw the fiery river leaping down the mountain. My people, he cried. The flames are upon us. With cries of fear, the people in the village fled far away into the forest, and the flames feasted upon the homes they loved. The 2 hunters went to look upon the mountain, and when they came back, they said sadly, There are no flowers on the mountain. Not a bird song did we hear. Not a living creature did we see. It is all dark and gloomy. We know the fire is there, for the blue smoke still floats up to the sky, but the mountain will never again be our friend. Part 3. The Bird of Flame. When the Great Spirit saw the work of the flames, he was very angry. The fires of this mountain must perish, he said. No longer shall its red flames light the midnight sky. The mountain trembled with fear at the angry words of the Great Spirit. O Father of all fire and light, cried the Fire Spirit, I know that the flames have been cruel. They killed the beautiful flowers and drove your children from their homes. But for many, many moons they heeded my words and were good and gentle. They drove the frost and cold of winter from the wigwams of the village. The little children laughed to see the red light in the sky. The hearts of your people will be sad if the flames must perish from the earth. The Great Spirit listened to the words of the gentle Spirit of Fire, but he answered, The fires must perish. They have been cruel to my people, and the little children will fear them now. But because the children once loved them, the beautiful colors of the flames shall still live to make glad the hearts of all who look upon them. Then the Great Spirit struck the mountain with his magic war club. The smoke above it faded away, its fires grew cold and dead. In its dark and gloomy heart only one little flame still trembled. It looked like a star. How beautiful it was! The Great Spirit looked upon the little flame. He saw that it was beautiful and gentle, and he loved it. The fires of the mountain must perish, he said, but you, gentle flame, shall have wings and fly far away from the cruel fires, and all my children will love you as I do. Swiftly the little thing rose above the mountain and flew away in the sunshine. The light of the flames was still on its head. Their marvelous colors were on its wings. So from the mountain's heart of fire sprang the first hummingbird. It is the bird of flame, for it has all the beauty of the colors of the flame, but it is gentle, and every child on all the earth loves it and is glad to see it fluttering over the flowers. End of The Story of the First Hummingbird by Florence Holbrook.
The Tale of Tom Kitten by Beatrix Potter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Once upon a time, there were 3 little kittens, and their names were Mittens, Tom Kitten, and Moppet. They had dear little fur coats of their own, and they tumbled about the doorstep and played in the dust. But one day, their mother, Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit, expected friends to tea, so she fetched the kittens indoors to wash and dress them before the fine company arrived. First, she scrubbed their faces. This one is Moppet. Then she brushed their fur. This one is Mittens. Then she combed their tails and whiskers. This is Tom Kitten. Tom was very naughty, and he scratched. Mrs. Tabitha dressed Moppet and Mittens in clean pinafores and tuckers, and then she took all sorts of elegant, uncomfortable clothes out of a chest of drawers in order to dress up her son Thomas. Tom Kitten was very fat, and he had grown. Several buttons burst off. His mother sewed them on again. When the 3 kittens were ready, Mrs. Tabitha unwisely turned them out into the garden to be out of the way while she made hot buttered toast. Now keep your frocks clean, children. You must walk on your hind legs. Keep away from the dirty ash pit, and from Sally Penny, and from the pigsty and the puddle ducks. Moppet and Mittens walked down the garden path unsteadily. Presently they trod upon their pinafores and fell on their noses. When they stood up, there were several green smears. "Let's climb up the rockery and sit on the garden wall," said Moppet. They turned their pinafores back to front and went up with a skip and a jump. Moppet's white tucker fell down into the road. Tom Kitten was quite unable to jump when walking upon his hind legs in trousers. He came up the rockery by degrees, breaking the ferns and shredding buttons right and left. He was all in pieces when he reached the top of the wall. Moppet and Mittens tried to pull him together. His hat fell off, and the rest of the buttons burst. While they were in difficulties, there was a pit-pat, paddle-pat, and the 3 puddle ducks came along the hard, high road, marching one behind the other and doing the goose step. Pit-pat, paddle-pat, pit-pat, waddle-pat. They stopped and stood in a row and stared up at the kittens. They had very small eyes and looked surprised. Then the 2 duckbirds, Rebecca and Gemma Puddle Duck, picked up the hat and tucker and put them on. Mittens laughed so that she fell off the wall. Moppet and Tom descended after her. The pinafores and all the rest of Tom's clothes came off on the way down. "Come, Mr. Drake Puddle Duck," said Moppet. "Come and help us to dress him. Come and button up Tom." Mr. Drake Puddle Duck advanced in a slow, sideways manner and picked up the various articles. But he put them on himself. They fitted him even worse than Tom Kitten. "It's a very fine morning," said Mr. Drake Puddle Duck. He and Gemma and Rebecca Puddle Duck set off up the road, keeping step. Pit, pat, paddle, pat, pit, pat, waddle, pat. Then Tabitha Twitchit came down the garden and found her kittens on the wall with no clothes. She pulled them off the wall, smacked them, and took them back to the house. "My friends will arrive in a minute, and you are not fit to be seen. I am affronted," said Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit. She sent them upstairs, and I am sorry to say she told her friends that they were in bed with the measles, which was not true. Quite the contrary. They were not in bed, not in the least. Somehow there were very extraordinary noises overhead, which disturbed the dignity and repose of the tea party. And I think that some day I shall have to make another, larger book to tell you more about Tom Kitten. As for the puddle ducks, they went into a pond. The clothes all came off directly, because there were no buttons. And Mr. Drake Puddle Duck and Gemma and Rebecca have been looking for them ever since. End of The Tale of Tom Kitten by Beatrix Potter.
The Lost Doll by Maud Lindsay. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. There was once upon a time a little girl who had a china doll named Jenny Bluebell. Jenny Bluebell had black hair and blue eyes and rosy cheeks and a smiling mouth, and on her feet were painted gilt slippers that shone like gold. The little girl loved her more than she had ever loved any other doll, and wherever she went, she wanted Jenny Bluebell to go too. She took her to walk in the lane and to ride in the carriage, and one day she carried her to a meadow where she and her little brother went to pick goldenrod. She held her in her arms all the way just as Mother held the baby, and when she got to the meadow, she laid her down to rest in the long meadow grass while she picked the flowers. Meadow grass makes a beautiful soft bed for a doll. "I will come back for you by and by," she said as she left her there. But when it was time to go home, all the green grass looked alike to the little girl, and she could not tell where the dear doll lay. "I put her right here, or at least I think I did. Oh, where can she be?" she cried, as she hurried from place to place, parting the grasses with her hands and peeping anxiously in. Her little brother searched too, but though they both looked till their mother called to ask why they were staying so long, they had to go home at last without the doll. "Perhaps the fairies have taken her away," said the little girl, who was almost crying. "Or a rabbit," said the little boy. "Father saw one in the field yesterday." But neither fairies nor rabbits had touched Jenny Bluebell. The tall grasses had swayed in the breezes this way and that way till she was hidden from sight, but she had not moved from the spot where the little girl had put her. All through the sunny afternoon, she lay there hoping that someone would find her. And when it began to grow dark and nobody had come, she felt very lonely indeed. "I shall not close my eyes all night," she said. And she did not. When the rooster over in the barnyard crowed for morning, her eyes were as wide open as they had been when the first star shone the evening before. Almost as soon as it was light again, she heard a noise in the meadow. Swish, swash, it sounded. The children's father was cutting his grass with a sharp-bladed scythe, but the doll did not know this, and when the grass around her fell down in a heap upon her, she thought that the end of everything had come. "What in the world has happened?" she asked a grasshopper who had been caught in the fall. "That is just what I should like to know myself," he answered, and he struggled up to the sunshine and never came back. The children did not come to look again for the doll that day or the next, and she gave up all hope of being found. "They have gone to visit their grandparents," she said. "I heard them talking about it. They have forgotten me, and I shall never see them again." That very afternoon, however, they came to the meadow to help their father rake the grass, which the sun by that time had dried into sweet-smelling hay. They had been on a visit, sure enough, and as they worked they talked of the things they had done while they were away from home. The doll could hear every word they said. "I rode Grandpa's horse to water 2 times by myself," said the little boy. "I fed Grandma's chickens every day with corn," said the little girl. "Grandpa plants corn in his fields," said the little boy. "You don't have to rake corn." "I like to rake hay," said the little girl, "and Mamma says that I may find Jenny Bluebell when the field is cleared." Oh, how the china doll's heart leaped for joy when she heard that. And do you believe it? The very next minute the hay that covered her was raked aside, and there she lay right before the little girl's eyes. "Oh, oh, oh," the little girl cried. "Here she is, my precious doll. I was never so glad in all my life." And Jenny Bluebell was glad too, though she did not say a word. She only smiled. End of The Lost Doll by Maud Lindsay. Read by Aileen Kierstead. The Snowball by Maud Lindsay. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Once upon a time, when all the ground was white with snow and all the roofs were trimmed with icicles, a little boy went out into the world to make snowballs. His mother wrapped him up so nice and warm from head to toe that you could scarcely see anything of him but the tip of his nose. And when the snowbirds that lived in his own front yard saw him, they did not know him. They flew away to the top of the fence and cocked their heads first on one side and then on the other, as if they were thinking, "Who can this be?" But by and by they found out. "Chirp, chirp," they said to each other. "It is only the little boy who throws us crumbs from the window." And they flew down into the yard again to watch him make snowballs. The little boy knew just how to make snowballs and how to throw them too, for he had seen his big cousin do it. First he took a handful of snow, and then he packed it in his hands like this, and then hurrah! He threw it as far as he could send it. One of his snowballs went into the corner of the yard, and one against a tree, and went all the way over the fence into the street. It was great fun to play in the snow, and the little boy was sorry when the maid called from the house to tell him it was time to come in. "As soon as I make one more," he answered. And he took a great handful of snow and made such a big snowball that he thought he must take it into the house to show to his mother. Now the little boy's mother had gone to market while he was playing in the snow, but he took the snowball into her room and put it on the hearth so that she might see it when she came home. There was a bright fire burning in the grate, and it sounded just as if it were laughing, with its cricklety-cracklety, cricklety-cracklety, when the little boy put the snowball down in front of it. "Oh, what a nice big fire," he said, and he climbed up into the rocking chair close beside it to wait for his mother. "Rockety-rock, rockety-rock," said the rocking chair. "Cricklety-cracklety," laughed the fire, and the little boy was so comfortable and so warm that he went fast asleep on the cushions. When he waked up, his mother was still away at the market, and the fire was still laughing, louder than ever. Cricklety-cracklety, cricklety-cracklety. But when he looked on the hearth for his snowball, it was gone. There was nothing there at all but a little pool of water. The little boy looked under the chair and under the bed and under the dresser, behind the door and in all the corners, upstairs and downstairs, high and low, but he could not find the snowball anywhere. And what do you think had become of it? The little boy's mother guessed as soon as she came home, and if you will ask your mother, I'm sure she will tell you. End of the Snowball by Maud Lindsay, read by Aileen Kierstead.
Thumbelina by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Holly Pankratz. There was once a woman who wished very much to have a little child. She went to a fairy and said, "I should so very much like to have a little child. Can you tell me where I can find one?" "Oh, that can be easily managed," said the fairy. "Here is a barleycorn. It is not exactly of the same sort as those which grow in the farmer's fields, and which the chickens eat. Put it into a flower pot and see what will happen." "Thank you," said the woman, and she gave the fairy 12 shillings, which was the price of the barleycorn. Then she went home and planted it, and there grew up a large handsome flower, somewhat like a tulip in appearance, but with its leaves tightly closed as if it were still a bud. "It is a beautiful flower," said the woman, and she kissed the red and gold-colored petals, and as she did so the flower opened, and she could see that it was a real tulip. But within the flower, upon the green velvet stamens, sat a very delicate and graceful little maiden. She was scarcely half as long as a thumb, and they gave her the name of Little Thumb, or Thumbelina, because she was so small. A walnut shell, elegantly polished, served her for a cradle. Her bed was formed of blue-violet leaves, with a rose leaf for a counterpane. Here she slept at night, but during the day she amused herself on a table where the peasant wife had placed a plate full of water. Round this plate were wreaths of flowers with their stems in the water, and upon it floated a large tulip leaf, which served the little one for a boat. Here she sat and rowed herself from side to side, with 2 oars made of white horsehair. It was a very pretty sight. Thumbelina could also sing so softly and sweetly that nothing like her singing had ever before been heard. One night, while she lay in her pretty bed, a large, ugly, wet toad crept through a broken pane of glass in the window and leaped right upon the table where she lay sleeping under her rose-leaf quilt. "What a pretty little wife this would make for my son," said the toad, and she took up the walnut shell in which Thumbelina lay asleep, and jumped through the window with it into the garden. In the swampy margin of a broad stream in the garden lived the toad with her son. He was uglier even than his mother, and when he saw the pretty little maiden in her elegant bed, he could only cry, "Croak, croak, croak." "Don't speak so loud or she will wake," said the toad, "and then she might run away, for she is as light as swan's down. We will place her on one of the water-lily leaves out in the stream. It will be like an island to her, she is so light and small, and then she cannot escape. And while she is there, we will make haste and prepare the stateroom under the marsh, in which you are to live when you are married." Far out in the stream grew a number of water lilies with broad green leaves, which seemed to float on top of the water. The largest of these leaves appeared farther off than the rest. The tiny creature woke very early in the morning, and began to cry bitterly when she found where she was, for she could see nothing but water on every side of the large green leaf, and no way of reaching the land. Meanwhile the old toad was very busy under the marsh, decking her room with rushes and yellow wildflowers, to make it look pretty for her new daughter-in-law. Then she swam out with her ugly son to the leaf on which she had placed poor Thumbelina. She wanted to bring the pretty bed that she might put it in the bridal chamber to be ready for her. The old toad bowed low to her in the water and said, "Here is my son. He will be your husband, and you will live happily together in the marsh by the stream." "Croak, croak, croak," was all her son could say for himself. So the toad took up the elegant little bed and swam away with it, leaving Thumbelina all alone on the green leaf, where she sat and wept. She could not bear to think of living with the old toad and having her ugly son for a husband. The little fishes who swam about in the water beneath had seen the toad and heard what she said, So now they lifted their heads above the water to look at the little maiden. As soon as they caught sight of her, they saw she was very pretty, and it vexed them to think that she must go and live with the ugly toads. No, it must never be. So they gathered together in the water around the green stalk, which held the leaf on which the little maiden stood, and gnawed it away at the root with their teeth. Then the leaf floated down the stream, carrying Thumbelina far away out of reach of land. Thumbelina sailed past many towns, and the little birds in the bushes saw her and sang, "What a lovely little creature!" So the leaf swam away with her farther and farther, until it brought her to other lands. A graceful little white butterfly constantly fluttered around her and at last alighted on the leaf. The little maiden pleased him, and she was glad of it, for now the toad could not possibly reach her, and the country through which she sailed was beautiful, and the sun shone upon the water till it glittered like liquid gold. She took off her girdle and tied one end of it round the butterfly, fastening the other end of the ribbon to the leaf, which now glided on much faster than before, taking Thumbelina with it as she stood. Presently a large cockchafer flew by. The moment he caught sight of her, he seized her round her delicate waist with his claws and flew with her into a tree. The green leaf floated away on the brook, and the butterfly flew with it, for he was fastened to it and could not get away. Oh, how frightened Thumbelina felt when the cockchafer flew with her to the tree! But especially was she sorry for the beautiful white butterfly which she had fastened to the leaf, for if he could not free himself he would die of hunger. But the cockchafer did not trouble himself at all about the matter. He seated himself by her side on a large green leaf, gave her some honey from the flowers to eat, and told her she was very pretty, though not in the least like a cockchafer. After a time all the cockchafers who lived in the tree came to pay Thumbelina a visit. They stared at her, and then the young lady cockchafers turned up their feelers and said, "She has only 2 legs, how ugly that looks!" "She has no feelers," and another, "Her waist is quite slim." "Pooh, she is like a human being." "Oh, she is ugly," said all the lady cockchafers. The cockchafer who had run away with her believed all the others when they said she was ugly. He would have nothing more to say to her, and told her she might go where she liked. Then he flew down with her from the tree and placed her on a daisy, and she wept at the thought that she was so ugly that even the cockchafers would have nothing to say to her. And all the while she was really the loveliest creature that one could imagine, and as tender and delicate as a beautiful rose leaf. During the whole summer poor little Thumbelina lived quite alone in the wide forest. She wove herself a bed with blades of grass and hung it up under a broad leaf, to protect herself from the rain. She sucked the honey from the flowers for food, and drank the dew from their leaves every morning. So passed away the summer and the autumn, and then came the winter, the long, cold winter. All the birds who had sung to her so sweetly had flown away, and the trees and the flowers had withered. The large shamrock, under the shelter of which she had lived, was now rolled together and shriveled up. Nothing remained but a yellow, withered stalk. She felt dreadfully cold, for her clothes were torn, and she was herself so frail and delicate that she was nearly frozen to death. It began to snow, too, and the snowflakes, as they fell upon her, were like a whole shovelful falling upon one of us, for we are tall, she was only an inch high. She wrapped herself in a dry leaf, but it cracked in the middle and could not keep her warm, and she shivered with cold. Near the wood in which she had been living was a large cornfield, but the corn had been cut a long time. Nothing remained but the bare, dry stubble, standing up out of the frozen ground. It was to her like struggling through a large wood. Oh, how she shivered with the cold! She came at last to the door of a field mouse who had a little den under the corn stubble. There dwelt the field mouse in warmth and comfort, with a whole room full of corn, a kitchen, and a beautiful dining room. Poor Thumbelina stood before the door, just like a little beggar girl, and asked for a small piece of barley-corn, for she had been without a morsel to eat for 2 days. "You poor little creature," said the field mouse, for she was really a good old mouse. "Come into my warm room and dine with me." She was pleased with Thumbelina, so she said, "You are quite welcome to stay with me all the winter if you like, but you must keep my rooms clean and neat, and tell me stories, for I shall like to hear them very much." And Thumbelina did all that the field mice asked her, and found herself very comfortable. "We shall have a visitor soon," said the field mouse one day. "My neighbor pays me a visit once a week. He is better off than I am. He has large rooms and wears a beautiful black velvet coat. If you could only have him for a husband, you would be well provided for indeed. But he is blind, so you must tell him some of your prettiest stories." Thumbelina did not feel at all interested about this neighbor, for he was a mole. However, he came and paid his visit, dressed in his black velvet coat. "He is very rich and learned, and his house is 20 times larger than mine," said the field mouse. He was rich and learned, no doubt, but he always spoke slightingly of the sun and the pretty flowers because he had never seen them. Thumbelina was obliged to sing to him, "Ladybird, ladybird, fly away home," and many other pretty songs, and the mole fell in love with her because she had so sweet a voice. But he said nothing yet, for he was very prudent and cautious. A short time before, the mole had dug a long passage under the earth which led from the dwelling of the field mouse to his own, and here she had permission to walk, with Thumbelina whenever she liked. But he warned them not to be alarmed at the sight of a dead bird which lay in the passage. It was a perfect bird with a beak and feathers, and could not have been dead long. It was lying just where the mole had made his passage. The mole took in his mouth a piece of phosphorescent wood, which glittered like fire in the dark. Then he went before them to light them through the long dark passage. When they came to the spot where the dead bird lay, the mole pushed his broad nose through the ceiling so that the earth gave way, and the daylight shone into the passage. In the middle of the floor lay a swallow, his beautiful wings pulled close to his sides, his feet and head drawn up under his feathers. The poor bird had evidently died of the cold. It made little Thumbelina very sad to see it. She did so love the little birds. All the summer they had sung and twittered for her so beautifully. But the mole pushed it aside with his crooked legs and said, "He will sing no more now. How miserable it must be to be born a bird. I am thankful that none of my children will ever be birds. They can do nothing but cry, tweet, tweet, and must always die of hunger in the winter." "Yes, you may well say that as a clever man," exclaimed the field mouse. "What is the use of his twittering if, when winter comes, he must either starve or be frozen to death? Still, birds are very high bred." Thumbelina said nothing, but when the two others had turned their backs upon the bird, she swooped down and stroked aside the soft feathers which covered his head, and kissed the closed eyelids. "Perhaps this was the one who sang to me so sweetly in the summer," she said, "and how much pleasure it gave me, you dear pretty bird." The mole now stopped up the hole through which the daylight shone, and then accompanied the ladies home. But during the night, Thumbelina could not sleep, so she got out of bed and wove a large, beautiful carpet of hay. She carried it to the dead bird and spread it over him, with some down from the flowers which she had found in the field mice's room. It was as soft as wool, and she spread some of it on each side of the bird so that he might lie warmly in the cold earth. "Farewell, pretty little bird," said she. "Farewell. Thank you for your delightful singing during the summer, when all the trees were green and the warm sun shone upon us." Then she laid her head on the bird's breast, but she was alarmed, for it seemed as if something inside the bird went thump, thump. It was the bird's heart. He was not really dead, only benumbed with the cold, and the warmth had restored him to life. In autumn all the swallows fly away into warm countries, but if one happens to linger, the cold seizes it, and it becomes chilled and falls down as if dead. It remains where it fell, and the cold snow covers it. Thumbelina trembled very much. She was quite frightened, for the bird was large, a great deal larger than herself. She was only an inch high. But she took courage, laid the wool more thickly over the poor swallow, and then took a leaf which she had used for her own counterpane and laid it over his head. The next night she again stole out to see him. He was alive, but very weak. He could only open his eyes for a moment to look at Thumbelina, who stood by, holding a piece of decayed wood in her hand, for she had no other lantern. "Thank you, pretty little maiden," said the sick swallow. "I have been so nicely warmed that I shall soon regain my strength, and be able to fly about again in the warm sunshine." "Oh," said she, "it is cold out of doors now. It snows and freezes. Stay in your warm bed. I will take care of you." She brought the swallow some water in a flower leaf, and after he had drunk, he told her that he had wounded one of his wings in a thorn bush and could not fly as fast as the others, who were soon far away on their journey to warm countries. At last he had fallen to the earth and could remember nothing more, nor how he came to be where she had found him. All winter the swallow remained underground, and Thumbelina nursed him with care and love. She did not tell either the mole or the field mouse anything about it, for they did not like swallows. Very soon the springtime came, and the sun warmed the earth. Then the swallow bade farewell to Thumbelina, and she opened the hole in the ceiling which the mole had made. The sun shone in upon them so beautifully that the swallow asked her if she would go with him. She could sit on his back, he said, and he would fly away with her into the green woods. But she knew it would grieve the field mouse if she left her in that manner, so she said, "No, I cannot." "Farewell, then, farewell, you good, pretty little maiden," said the swallow, and he flew out into the sunshine. Thumbelina looked after him, and the tears rose in her eyes. She was very fond of the poor swallow. "Tweet, tweet," sang the bird, as he flew out into the green woods, and Thumbelina felt very sad. She was not allowed to go out into the warm sunshine. The corn which had been sowed in the field over the house of the field mouse had grown up high into the air and formed a thick wood to Thumbelina, who was only an inch in height. "You are going to be married, little one," said the field mouse. "My neighbor has asked for you. What good fortune for a poor child like you! Now we will prepare your wedding clothes. They must be woolen and linen. Nothing must be wanting when you are the wife of the mole." Thumbelina had to turn the spindle, and the field mouse hired 4 spiders who were to weave day and night. Every evening the mole visited her and was continually speaking of the time when the summer would be over. Then he would keep his wedding day with Thumbelina, but now the heat of the sun was so great that it burned the earth and made it hard like stone. As soon as the summer was over, the wedding should take place, but Thumbelina was not at all pleased, for she did not like the tiresome mole. Every morning when the sun rose and every evening when it went down, she would creep out at the door, and as the wind blew aside the ears of corn so that she could see the blue sky, she thought how beautiful and bright it seemed out there, and wished so much to see her dear friend the swallow again. But he never returned, for by this time he had flown far away into the lovely green forest. When autumn arrived, Thumbelina had her outfit quite ready, and the field mouse said to her, "In 4 weeks the wedding must take place." Then she wept, and said she would not marry the disagreeable mole. "Nonsense," replied the field mouse. "Now don't be obstinate, or I shall bite you with my white teeth. He is a very handsome mole. The queen herself does not wear more beautiful velvets and furs. His kitchens and cellars are quite full. You ought to be very thankful for such good fortune." So the wedding day was fixed, on which the mole was to take her away to live with him deep under the earth, and never again to see the warm sun because he did not like it. The poor child was very unhappy at the thought of saying farewell to the beautiful sun, and as the field mouse had given her permission to stand at the door, she went to look at it once more. "Farewell, bright sun," she cried, stretching out her arm towards it, and then she walked a short distance from the house, for the corn had been cut, and only the dry stubble remained in the fields. "Farewell, farewell," she repeated, twining her arm around a little red flower that grew just by her side. "Greet the little swallow from me, if you should see him again." "Tweet, tweet," sounded overhead suddenly. She looked up, and there was the swallow himself, flying close by. As soon as he spied Thumbelina, he was delighted. She told him how unwilling she was to marry the ugly mole, and to live always beneath the earth, never more to see the bright sun. And as she told him, she wept. "Cold winter is coming," said the swallow, "and I'm going to fly away into warmer countries. Will you go with me? You can sit on my back and fasten yourself on with your sash. Then we can fly away from the ugly mole and his gloomy rooms, far away over the mountains into warmer countries, where the sun shines more brightly than here, where it's always summer, and the flowers bloom in greater beauty. Fly now with me, dear little one. You saved my life when I lay frozen in that dark, dreary passage." "Yes, I will go with you," said Thumbelina, and she seated herself on the bird's back, with her feet on his outstretched wings, and tied her girdle to one of his strongest feathers. The swallow rose high in the air and flew over forest and over sea, high above the highest mountains, covered with eternal snow. Thumbelina would have been frozen in the cold air, but she crept under the bird's warm feathers, keeping her little head uncovered, so that she might admire the beautiful lands over which they passed. At length they reached the warm countries, where the sun shines brightly and the sky seems so much higher above the earth. Here on the hedges and by the wayside grew purple, green, and white grapes. Lemons and oranges hung from trees in the fields, and the air was fragrant with myrtles and orange blossoms. Beautiful children ran along the country lanes, playing with large gay butterflies, and as the swallow flew farther and farther, every place appeared still more lovely. At last they came to a blue lake, and by the side of it, shaded by trees of the deepest green, stood a palace of dazzling white marble built in the olden times. Vines clustered around its lofty pillars, and at the top were many swallows' nests, and one of these was the home of the swallow who carried Thumbelina. "This is my house," said the swallow, "but it would not do for you to live there. You would not be comfortable. You must choose for yourself one of these lovely flowers, and I will put you down upon it, and then you shall have everything that you can wish to make you happy." "That will be delightful," she said, and clapped her little hands for joy. A large marble pillar lay on the ground, which, in falling, had been broken into 3 pieces. Between these pieces grew the most beautiful large white flowers, so the swallow flew down with Thumbelina and placed her on one of the broad leaves. But how surprised she was to see in the middle of the flower a tiny little man, as white and transparent as if he had been made of crystal. He had a gold crown on his head, and delicate wings at his shoulders, and was not much larger than was she herself. He was the angel of the flower, for a tiny man and a tiny woman dwell in every flower, and this was the king of them all. "Oh, how beautiful he is!" whispered Thumbelina to the swallow. The little prince was at first quite frightened of the bird, who was like a giant compared to such a delicate little creature as himself. But when he saw Thumbelina, he was delighted and thought her the prettiest little maiden he had ever seen. He took the gold crown from his head and placed it on hers, and asked her name and if she would be his wife and queen over all the flowers. This certainly was a very different sort of husband from the son of the toad, or the mole with his black velvet and fur, so she said yes to the handsome prince. Then all the flowers opened, and out of each came a little lady or a tiny lord, all so pretty it was quite a pleasure to look at them. Each of them brought Thumbelina a present, but the best gift was a pair of beautiful wings, which had belonged to a large white fly, and they fastened them to Thumbelina's shoulders, so that she might fly from flower to flower. Then there was much rejoicing, and the little swallow who sat above them in his nest was asked to sing a wedding song, which he did as well as he could. But in his heart he felt sad, for he was very fond of Thumbelina, and would have liked never to part from her again. "You must not be called Thumbelina any more," said the spirit of the flowers to her. "It is an ugly name, and you are so very lovely. We will call you Maya." "Farewell, farewell," said the swallow with a heavy heart, as he left the warm countries to fly back into Denmark. There he had a nest over the window of a house in which dwelt the writer of fairy tales. The swallow sang, "Tweet, tweet," and from his song came the whole story. End of Thumbelina by Hans Christian Andersen.